everyone. I'm good, thanks. So what we're looking at in this paper is really how do we enhance digital forensic readiness? But we're not talking to digital forensic readiness from a specific technology point of view. We're elevating the conversation a little bit and looking at the problem from an organizational point of view. So if you look at what we've done, let me move closer to this thing. The context is digital transformation projects. So we take the context of digital transformation projects and say, how do we weave digital forensic readiness across the entire life cycle of a digital transformation project? We know that these projects are undertaken for purposes where business is concerned to improve competitive advantage, be innovative and look at efficiencies. But throughout all of that, what we found as part of the study is there's a correlation between the uptake on digital transformation project and the cyber or digital crimes that organizations face, particularly those that undergo this process. So the novelty of this is really around creating that thread of forensic readiness within a digital transformation lifecycle. The output at this stage theoretically is what we call the FOREC continuum, which is a forensic readiness architecture taking into consideration different pillars that I'll discuss to get to how we arrived at this framework. But the background of it is really to look at issues that digital transformation projects face, particularly the high failure rate. We are more interested in the technology aspect of the failure rate, but as part of the literature that we've reviewed, we've seen that many of the reasons for the failure are attributable to unclear goals, misalignment, leadership, really business-specific issues. But in there, we unpack then the specific nuance to this failure, which is the rise in digital crimes against these digital transformation projects. So they're essentially becoming targets for these bad actors. And when you take a step back to look at, could we not solve the problem of the failure or the risks associated with digital transformation projects by using existing digital forensic readiness models? The answer is not completely. In part we can, but not fully. And the reason being is that when we look at models or frameworks that have existed or have been developed over the last 10 years, these are very technology specific. So they speak to a specific device, or they'll speak to cloud, or they'll speak to, so they very much around a specific focus on the technology. They don't necessarily delve deeper into what business is experiencing. So bringing that, trying to move away from that isolated application and give it general applicability in business has become a problem. And hence we've then taken a different approach to leveraging the body of knowledge that exists in digital forensic readiness frameworks and expanding and building on them. And we've done that in three ways, right? In the one instance, we look at industry standards. So we look at standards from a broad perspective to say, what are the standards that exist, best practice, that speak to elements of digital forensic readiness as we know it? So we take a perspective of ISO 27001 from an information security point of view, from a risk management point of view with 37001. We look at the control environment with COBIT and COSO. So very multidisciplinary in terms of the literature that we survey from a best practice point of view, and we extract out of that principles, if you will, that align or speak to digital forensic readiness. Then we look at the very models or frameworks that exist or that have been developed in the last 10 years specific to digital forensic readiness, and there are a number of local and international authors that whose literature or work we reference. But essentially what we find in the literature that speaks to the frameworks that have been developed specific to digital forensic readiness is they agree in principle on what this thing is, right? So you have the policy or the regulatory framework, as it were, speaking to you need to have these policies, incident response plan, and so forth, that define what happens, what steps do we take when things go wrong. So we move from the policy or the regulatory environment into the data. Many of these frameworks speak to what do we do with the data? How do we classify our data? What type of data do we keep and for how long? It speaks to logs and so forth. The third element that all the authors seem to agree on is around elements of, now that something has happened, how do we then put an organization in a position where it can respond very quickly, reduce the cost and the time of the investigation, but also get to the evidence, so the admissibility of evidence. And then finally, the principle of continuity from a monitor and evaluate point of view. So while these frameworks appear to be different, at a principle level, when you extract what comes out of these digital forensic readiness frameworks, those are the core principles. And then finally, we look at digital transformation as a separate beast to say, what about digital transformation makes it work or fail? And so we look at project management principles that are discussed in terms of how you go about conducting a digital transformation project. So you see three disciplines in this study. One speaks to more regulatory, legislative. The other speaks more at a technical level. And then finally, from a multidisciplinary point of view, we then go into the project management leg and take lessons from that. And the reason we went with a systematic literature review is because we wanted to move away from almost, as we say in South Africa, wearing oorklappies, looking at it from a perspective of technology and realizing that this thing exists within the context of a business. So what are these moving parts in business that affect what we do with our technology from a forensic readiness point of view? I may have touched on this, but we've looked at literature over the last 8 to 10 years. We've had to go a little earlier, but essentially it covers that 10-year period and not really specific to an industry. So we looked at more than 2,000 odd, or literature at least, that reviewed more than 2,000 digital transformation projects, why they failed, why they succeeded, and so forth, and then infused or synthesized that data together with what we know from digital transformation literature. What that has led to is this forensic readiness architecture that's specific to digital transformation projects. And essentially, and I'll get to the model in the next slide very quickly, is it's a model with 4 layers, L1 to L4. What it considers is, at an L1 layer, we have these independent variables. We find that there are certain things that, at the core of a digital transformation project, they rely on, or rather, the project itself is controlled by what happens in the organization, in the country, and so forth. So we define these as independent variables, and we move inwards to dependent variables, and a layer down, L3, where we talk about our aggregated composite variables, and then the dimensional variables. So that's what it looks like. The outer circle are the independent variables. It says it's independent of this project. This is the organization and those specific elements that affect a project, a digital transformation project, that we need to consider as we move towards L4 on digital transformation. Your strategy, your culture, compliance, and the control environment within the organization itself. When you move to L2 and you start focusing on the project itself, you get to your dependent variables. You'll immediately, some of you who've dabbled into project management will see elements of Prince2 there, strategic visioning, project steering, operational oversight, and so forth. So at L2 level, we're saying, now that you exist within this jurisdiction and in this organization, how do you then, in envisioning or starting off this project, what are those things that you need to do? At L3 level, we break it down and we give meaning to the L2 layer, where we talk about the different phases. And then finally at L4, it's those center theme. L4 is really where the essence of digital forensic readiness sits. So the questions we ask at L4 are specific to digital forensic readiness, and then from L3, L2 and L1 are specific to the project itself and the culture within the organization. Where we are right now with this model is the next phase of it, is we have a public sector entity that has a project that has lasted the last 4 years. They've spent well over 15 million on it, and we're using that project to assess the entire FOREC continuum, the various elements of it. And yeah, it's quite interesting what we're coming up with so far. But the value of this work for us has been to elevate the conversation beyond, I need to have NKs, FTK, I need to preserve logs and preserve them for how long, because we've realized that fraud, waste, abuse happens in the very organizations where logs are being kept and logs are being analyzed, and these tools that we use exist. So we're looking at how do we solve this problem for business in a way that is actually meaningful and impactful, rather than here's a piece of technology, it's really cool, and you can do something with it. I'll pause there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Any questions from the audience? Playing devil's advocate.
Yes.
You put out the stats, the high proportion of these DT projects have actually failed. Just again, taking the role of a project manager, why would I want to increase the complexity? Why would I want to increase the complexity of one of these projects by adding more to it? Effectively, tell me on the value add.
It's a good question. It's not really the complexity. One of the problems we're finding now with this case study that we're looking at is that the project management team that was put together by this public sector entity, there were strong project managers and they had great technical skills, but from a risk perspective, they were not wearing that hat. So this becomes almost a compass for them to say, when I apply my skills and manage this project, here's a checkpoint. Have I considered this? Have I done the things that are defined by this model? It's more of a tool that assists and create a level of consciousness around managing the risk of digital threats within your environment or on the project.
Thank you, you sold me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Antonia. All right, do we have any speakers for paper